Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The town of Arroyo Ford didn't look like much from the ridge, just a knot of half-painted buildings tucked into the bend of the dry riverbed, with a water tower that leaned a little too far north. Most of the roofs were tin, rusted through. The only sound in the street was the clack of mule hooves and the slow groan of an ungreased windmill somewhere behind the livery. Harlan Grieve reined in his horse at the edge of town and stared. He hadn't been here in over a year, and he didn't like being here now. But the letter he kept folded in the inside pocket of his coat, a veteran's lottery claim from the territorial office, said if he didn't show up this week, they'd pass his winnings on to the next eligible name. He didn't trust it. Never had. But he needed the land. 12 years ago, Harlan had gone to war alongside his younger brother Thomas. Only one of them came back. Since then, he'd been working a patch of soil out near Lonesome Draw, where the ridge kept the worst of the wind off and the pine trees grew twisted but tall. His cabin was built by hand, the barn half finished. No wife, no livestock worth naming, just time and quiet. The claim had promised him 80 acres of surveyed, grazing land in a valley near the San Pedro. But now, as he tied off his horse outside the telegraph office that doubled as the land lottery desk, his stomach was tight. Not from fear exactly. He didn't get scared like he used to, but from the kind of unease that grows out of experience. He stepped inside. The air was hot with ink and stale pipe smoke. Behind a desk sat a tall man in a badly cut suit, flipping through a list. Two other men leaned against the back wall, saying nothing. On the floor near a crate of burlap sacks sat a jug of water, half full, dust clinging to the rim. "You're here for your draw?" the man asked, not looking up. Harlan Grieve. The clerk's fingers ran down the page. Cavalry veteran. Served 69 to 71. Stationed out of Fort Bayard. Harlan gave a slight nod. The man finally looked up. "You're a lucky one. Final round. And your name comes up. That's something." He didn't respond. Didn't smile. The clerk stood, stepped around the desk, and pointed to a document on the table. "Here's the deeds certif." Then he hesitated. His hand drifted away from the paper. He looked at the two men by the wall, then back at Harlan. There's been a change. Harlan's face didn't move, but his chest tightened slightly. What kind of change? The man cleared his throat. Territorial land bonds were reassessed. Your parcel was reassigned 2 weeks ago due to a claim dispute. However, under the lottery exchange provisions, we're authorized to provide an alternate award. He gestured behind him. The two men stepped aside, and she stepped forward. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't look at the floor. Just stood there, barefoot, her arms chained at the wrists with a rusted loop of iron that clinked softly when she shifted weight. Her long black hair hung over one shoulder, tangled with bits of dust and string. Her deerskin dress was torn along the hem and shoulder. A bruise the size of a knuckle-colored one collarbone. She had a thin build, but not frail. The kind of strength that didn't come from ease. Her eyes locked on Harlan's and held. "Her name's Kaya," the man said. 25. Apache. Seized in a tribal conflict last fall. She's been processed. Fully legal transfer of property under Section 7 of the Reparation Exchange. Silence. The man cleared his throat again, uncomfortable now. "She's yours." Harlan didn't move. Didn't blink. He looked at the girl again. Then back to the man. "I came here for land." The man shrugged like it wasn't his fault. "This is what's available now. Take it or walk away." Walk away. That would have been simple. He didn't need this. Didn't want this. But if he left her, what then? He'd seen what men did to women like her. In camps. Behind saloons. Out on the trail. She would be sold again. Or worse. He reached in his coat, pulled out the letter, and dropped it on the desk. "I'll take her," he said. Not loud. Not angry. Just plain. The chain was handed over without ceremony. She didn't resist. Just watched him with a steady expression that wasn't quite trust, but wasn't fear either. They left without a word. The ride out of town was silent. Kaya sat behind him on the horse, knees gripping the saddle, her arms tied around her waist. Not holding him, just staying balanced. Harlan didn't look back. He didn't say anything. He didn't know what the hell he'd just done. Every few minutes, he glanced at her hands. Red, scabbed. Her fingers flexed slowly, like they were still testing the fact that they were unshackled now. He could feel her breathing against his back. They crossed the flats at sunset. The land grew redder then, lit up by the last light, but neither of them paid it much mind. By the time they reached the clearing at Lonesome Draw, it was dark. His cabin sat low against the slope. Hand-built. One room, wood stove in the corner, tin roof patched with pine tar. The barn leaned to one side, half collapsed. There was a water barrel, 2 cots, a cook fire ring, and a worn fence that enclosed nothing. He dismounted and turned to her. "You can stay." She didn't answer. He stepped forward, undid the chain, and tossed it onto the porch. He opened the door. She hesitated for the first time, then walked through. Inside, she looked around. Took in the room. 1 table, 2 chairs, a cot in each corner, tin cups on a shelf. A stitched-up coat hung near the door. "This one's yours," he said, nodding toward the unused cot. "You're not a prisoner. You leave if you want." She sat slowly, her knees bending stiff from the ride. He handed her a blanket, then poured water into a small tin bowl. "Food's cold. There's beans in the sack." Still no answer. She began unwrapping the cloth around her wrists, slowly, without asking. He didn't watch. He lit the stove and sat. An hour passed. Neither of them spoke, but she didn't run, and he didn't send her away. And in the quiet that stretched between them, something settled. Not trust. Not yet, but the start of it. The cold hung in the cabin like a held breath. Thin winter light filtered through the narrow window slats, throwing pale lines across the wooden floor. Outside, the trees were still, not even a breeze stirring the dead needles beneath them. No birds, no wind, just silence. Harlan Greaves sat at the edge of his cot, boots half-laced, eyes fixed on the stove. The coals had long gone to ash. His breath came out visible in the air. He wasn't used to sharing the space. He hadn't lit a second fire in over a year. The girl, the woman, was still asleep. She lay on her side on the other cot across the room, arms folded in close to her chest under the blanket he'd given her. Her hair had loosened in the night, long strands trailing across her face and the pillow. Her moccasins sat beside the cot, lined up neatly. She hadn't touched the food he'd left on the table. Harlan didn't move. He just watched. He expected her to be gone, walk off at first light, maybe steal something, maybe not. He wouldn't have chased her, wouldn't have blamed her. But she hadn't moved, and now she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim. She saw him watching. Didn't flinch, just stare back. He stood up. "I'll check the traps," he said. His voice came low, rough from disuse. "Won't be long." She didn't answer, but her eyes stayed on him. He grabbed his coat, slung his rifle over one shoulder, and stepped out into the cold. The air outside was sharp. Frost dusted the tall grass near the waterline. He walked the perimeter slow, checking each snare along the fence line. 2 were empty. One had a jackrabbit. That was enough for breakfast. He reset the snares, knelt by the creek to rinse his hands, and looked back toward the cabin. Smoke was curling from the stovepipe. She'd lit the fire. That surprised him more than it should have. When he stepped inside, the smell of warmth hit him first. Burnt wood and something close to comfort. The stove crackled steady now. She stood near it, stirring the pot with a carved wooden spoon he hadn't used in weeks. The blanket was folded on her cot. Her hair was tied back, the sides twisted with a leather strip she must have found in his old sewing box. She didn't speak when he entered, just nodded once. He nodded back, then set the rabbit down on the table. She looked at it, then at him. Waited. "I'll clean it," he said. She didn't move to stop him. They didn't talk much while they ate. She ate slow, methodical, eyes sharp, always watching him in the quiet way animals did when they hadn't decided if they were safe. Her hands didn't tremble. Her posture was upright. She wasn't relaxed, but she wasn't preparing to flee either. Afterward, she took the tin bowls, walked outside, and rinsed them in the creek without being told. She brought them back in, dried them with a scrap of cloth, and set them upside down on a shelf. Still, she said nothing. Harlan watched her every movement with the kind of attention that had kept him alive during patrols. This wasn't habit. It was assessment, trying to understand who she was, not by what she said, but by what she did. She kept things clean, She didn't ask for more. She didn't look for a way out. When midday came, she moved to the corner of the room and sat on the floor near the fire, cross-legged. Still, he worked outside for most of the afternoon, reinforcing the barn door, checking fence posts, clearing snowmelt from the trough. When he came back in near dusk, his shoulders ached, his leg throbbed. He stepped into the cabin, expecting silence. But she had cooked again. This time it was beans and cornbread from a dry mix he'd forgotten he still had. Nothing fancy, just hot and ready. She handed him a tin plate. Didn't look at him long, just did it. He nodded. Thank you. She gave a small nod back, almost unreadable, but it was there. That night, after she lay down, Harlan stayed up a while. He sat near the stove, sharpening his old knife, pausing now and then to listen. She didn't cry, didn't whisper, just breathed steady. He looked at her once, really looked. She was young, but not helpless, strong in ways he understood. He leaned back in his chair, let his hand drop into his lap. She didn't leave. He didn't ask her why, and that was enough for now. The days passed in silence, but it wasn't the kind that scratched. It was the kind that settled into the bones if you let it. Steady, predictable, like the cold. Kaya woke at dawn without being told. She folded the bedding, swept the floor, stirred the coals back to life with practiced care. No wasted movement. She worked like someone who'd lived in too many places where she wasn't allowed to rest. Harlan noticed. He didn't comment, just watched. He spent most mornings outside, splitting wood, checking for signs of elk along the draw, patching the north fence where coyotes had been nosing through. His limp made the work slower, but not weaker. And now, every time he came back inside, something had been done. The water barrel was filled, the dry goods reorganized. His spare shirt, the one with the torn sleeve, was stitched and folded on the cot. She didn't ask permission. She just did, and still said little. That afternoon, he found her near the barn, kneeling in the dirt with her sleeves rolled up, pulling broken weeds from the garden bed that hadn't been touched since summer. Her fingers were red from the cold. She didn't stop when he approached. He stood watching for a moment. You don't have to do that, he said. She didn't look at him. I know. That was the first time she'd spoken since they left Arroyo Ford. Her voice was calm, even. No fear in it. Just certainty. She pulled another root, tossed it aside. You plan on staying? He asked. She paused, then nodded once. For now. He didn't push further. That night, after dinner, she pulled out the worn sewing tin and sat near the fire, repairing one of the old saddle blankets. Her stitches were clean and close together. She didn't hum, didn't fidget, just worked. You've done this before, he said quietly. She gave a slight nod. My mother taught me. Before. She didn't finish the sentence. He didn't make her. Over the next days, their rhythm grew solid. He hunted. She cleaned. He mended the hinge on the cabin door. She found an old broom handle in the barn and cut it down to make a wash stick. He set traps. She brought in firewood. She began cooking without asking. Nothing fancy. Beans, cornmeal, dried meat boiled into stew. But it was warm, filling, always ready when he came back in from the cold. One night, after a hard day, splitting logs, he sat near the stove, rubbing his leg. She stood quietly across the room, then moved toward him with a jar of ointment from the shelf. She knelt beside him. Her fingers were light when they touched his knee. She rubbed the salve into the skin, careful not to push too hard where the bone swelled. He didn't stop her. He didn't speak. Her hands were warm. When she finished, she didn't rise right away, just sat back on her heels, looking at him like she was trying to understand something she hadn't seen before. You fought? She asked. He nodded. Yes. Lost someone. My brother. Silence again. She lowered her gaze. I lost my sister. He looked at her then. Real look, not the quick glances from before. Tribe sold me, she added. Said I was bad luck. He didn't answer right away. Then said, they were wrong. She didn't cry. She just sat there a moment longer, then stood and moved back to her cot. That night, he didn't sleep right away, because for the first time, the quiet between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like something earned. The thaw came slow that year, the kind that tricked you. A warm wind in the morning, then ice again by dusk. Snow shrank back from the edge of the ridge in uneven patches, turning the paths around the cabin to mud. Everything was damp, nothing dried. Boots stayed cold, shirt stayed heavy. Harlan felt it in his leg most days before the sky even changed. He tried to work through it, but pain came sharp now. Not the dull, manageable kind. This was hot, steady. It started behind the old bullet scar, near his shoulder, and radiated down his ribs, where the knife had opened him years before. On the fourth day, he collapsed outside the barn while chopping wood. Kaya heard the axe fall wrong. Not the sound of it striking timber, but hitting dirt. She rushed out barefoot, slipped in the slush as she dropped to his side. His face was pale, breathing shallow. His shirt stuck to him with sweat, and when she pressed her hand against his neck, his skin burned. She didn't panic, didn't speak, just moved. She dragged him inside by the arms, slow and steady. Folded one of the blankets and placed it under his head. Removed his boots, pulled the coat off, found the swelling under the old scar, angry red, hot to the touch. She dampened a cloth and wiped down his face. He didn't wake. That night, she sat beside him, feeding the stove every hour, keeping the warmth constant. When his fever peaked, he moaned once, just a low sound, barely a word, and tried to roll over. She pushed him gently back. "You're safe," she whispered, not sure if he could hear it. She hadn't touched another man since before she was sold the first time. But now, her hands moved with care, not fear. She unbuttoned his shirt enough to cool him, tucked the blankets around his sides, stayed near. He breathed hard through the night, sweat soaking the cot. She wiped him down again and again, not rushing, not turning away. By morning, the fever broke. He stirred just after dawn. She was seated on the floor near the fire, knees pulled up to her chest, a tin cup cradled in both hands. She hadn't slept. He blinked, throat dry, eyes finding hers across the room. "You stayed," he croaked. She nodded. "You needed someone." He coughed, chest rattling. "Always need someone," he said, half a joke, but it came out weak. She didn't smile, but she moved to his side, placed a hand on his forehead again. "Cooler now. Drink." She helped him sit up, brought him water. He drank in slow sips, then leaned back, breath shaky. He studied her for a long second. "You could have left." "I didn't want to." That sat between them. Then she stood, went to the stove, stirred the stew she'd been keeping warm all morning, poured a small bowl, carried it back. He took it without a word. The food was plain, but it tasted like something more than survival. Later that day, when he could walk, he stepped out into the light for a minute. She followed him out, just to make sure he wouldn't fall. He looked over the land, the barn, the fence, the cabin, then looked at her. "You can stay, as long as you want." She didn't answer with words. She simply nodded, turned, and walked back inside. And for the first time since the war, Harlan knew he didn't want to be alone anymore. The snow had melted for good now. The ground was soft underfoot, and the air smelled like damp bark and clean dirt. The wind had changed too. Less bitter, more steady. Birds came back, slowly. Not many, just enough to notice. Harlan stood near the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, staring at the broken stretch of fencing that wrapped halfway around the corral. The posts were rotted through in places. The rails had fallen. No stock had lived here in 3 years, not since his brother died. He let it go quiet, let the whole place stall. But now, with the sun back and her still here, something shifted. He grabbed the axe from the barn and started dragging timber from the old pile. Inside the cabin, Caius saw him through the open doorway. She finished rinsing the tin plate for breakfast and stepped outside without a word. He didn't ask her to help. She just picked up a second rail and followed him. They worked without talking. He dug out the broken post holes, drove new ones in with a mallet. She carried wood, measured gaps by eye, handed him the nails when he needed them. Her sleeves were rolled past the elbow. Her hands were scratched, dirt under the nails. But she didn't complain. Not once. By midday, they had replaced 5 full panels. When he stopped to wipe his brow, she held out the water flask. He took it, drank deep, then passed it back. Their hands brushed, just for a second. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. "Used to be cattle here," he said after a while. "Just 4 head. Enough for winter meat." She nodded. "You want more?" "Maybe," he said. Later, she studied the fence line. "You'll need a stronger gate." "I know. I can help." He looked at her. "You already are." Over the next week, the work continued. He taught her how to brace the corner posts with wire and stone. She showed him a way to bind the rail joints with soaked hide, a method she said her uncle used in high mountain wind. They hauled rock from the edge of the ridge to reinforce the north edge. She didn't hesitate, not when lifting, not when sweating. She never asked for rest. But he made her take breaks anyway, forced them both to sit, drink, eat in the shade. You know horses? He asked one afternoon. A little, she said. My father kept one. Until the last raid. Did you ride? She nodded. Not far, but well. That night, he opened the barn fully for the first time in years. Inside was his saddle, cracked but whole. And behind it, the old tack gear, a broken harness, and an empty stall full of moldy hay. She stood beside him, looked at the mess, and said plainly, "We'll clean it tomorrow." Not you. We. That was how it happened. Not in some moment of confession. Not in some storm or showdown. But in sweat and hammer strikes and the slow shaping of a place where two people could belong again. He watched her every evening as she washed the dirt from her arms and wiped her hands on her skirt. He didn't stare, just took it in quietly, her stillness, her steadiness, her presence. One night, as he leaned against the doorframe and looked out at the fence line they'd rebuilt together, she stepped beside him and said, "It's stronger now." He nodded. "So are we." She didn't answer, but she stayed right there, shoulder to shoulder. And that was enough. They had just finished reinforcing the last corner post of the corral when the sound of hooves echoed low from the southern ridge. Harlan stopped mid-swing, hammer still in his hand. Kaya had already turned her head, one hand lifting to shade her eyes. She didn't speak, but her body stilled in a way he recognized. Wariness, tightly held, ready to run, but not showing it. He set the hammer down, slow, then reached for his rifle from where it leaned against the nearby trough. Dust curled in the distance. Two riders, maybe three, coming steady. "You know them?" she asked. "No," he said. She didn't need more. She stepped back toward the cabin, not out of fear, but readiness. The riders reached the clearing a few minutes later. Three men, all wearing town dust. One in a dark brown coat with brass buttons. Another younger, narrow-eyed, holding his reins too loose like he'd never worked a real job. The third was the one that mattered. Lean, older, riding a buckskin gelding with a federal-issue saddle. He dismounted first. "Mr. Grieve?" the older one asked. Harlan nodded once. Rifle in plain sight, but not raised. "Name's Corman, from the Claims Adjustment Bureau. Out of Tucson." He opened his coat just enough to flash a badge. "Got word you accepted a live award in the Arroyo Ford lottery a few weeks back." "She's here," Harlan said plainly. "Why?" "Well," the man said, stepping forward slowly. "The records show a substitution was made without formal signature. Territorial Council wants confirmation. You can still cash out, trade the girl back for land, or monetary compensation." "She's not a trade," Harlan said. Corman paused. "Then you're claiming her? As property?" Harlan's jaw tightened. "She's not property." The younger man snorted from the saddle. "Then what is she?" Before Harlan could answer, Kaya stepped out from behind the cabin. She stood in full view now. Hair braided back, sleeves rolled. Her skirt was dusted with sawdust and dirt from the morning's work. No chains, no hesitation. "She's my partner," Harlan said. Corman looked at her, then at him again. "Sir, the law allows for formal ownership or exchange. No clause for partnership. Not in writing. I don't need it in writing." There was steel in his voice now. Corman held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded just barely. "Well, that's your right. We'll mark the claim as retained. But I'm required to inform you. The girl can't claim legal status unless—" "She doesn't need the government status," Harlan cut in. "She has mine." The third man said nothing, just pulled the reins and turned his horse back toward the ridge. Corman tipped his hat. "Suit yourself." Then they rode off. No threats, no goodbyes, just dust again. After the silence returned, Harlan exhaled slow. Kaya hadn't moved. He looked at her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I've heard worse." He set the rifle down, walked back to the corral. She followed. They didn't speak for the rest of the afternoon. But when they sat together that evening, two plates, two chairs, one steady fire, she placed her hand over his for the first time. He didn't pull away. He didn't speak. But he turned his hand so their fingers could stay threaded. Not as a claim, but as a choice. The sky turned gray 2 hours before it hit. Low clouds rolled in fast over the ridge, smearing out the sun like someone had taken a wet cloth to a clean slate. Harlan stood near the water barrel, eyes fixed west. The air had changed. He could smell it. Wet soil, iron dust lifting in the wind. He limped back to the cabin, slow but certain. "Kaya," he called, "we've got to bring everything in." She stepped out of the barn without needing to ask what was wrong. Her sleeves were rolled, skirt dirt-streaked from mending the lower stall. She glanced up once at the sky, then moved fast. No panic, just pace. She grabbed the baskets from the stoop, covered the firewood with a canvas tarp, and began checking the shutter latches on the window frames. By the time the wind truly picked up, the sky was black over the ridge and the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Thunder cracked once, low and distant, and the first fat drops of rain hit the cabin roof. Then it opened up. They sat inside with the lamps lit. The windows rattled in their frames. Rain hammered the roof and wind clawed at the back wall. Harlan checked the stovepipe once more to make sure no leak had opened. He could hear the barn groan, and so could she. "It won't hold," Caius said, standing up. He hesitated. His leg ached already from the earlier climb to the ridge. He wasn't in shape to fight a collapsed roof. She grabbed one of the old oilskins from the peg. "I'll do it," she said. "No." He stood. "You're not going out there alone." They ran across the yard in a full downpour, boots sinking into soft ground with every step. The wind howled down the draw, cold and sharp, and when they reached the barn, the rear panel had already buckled halfway in. Kaya didn't stop. She climbed onto the side stall and grabbed the loose slat, holding it steady while Harlan jammed a bore beneath it. The hammer slipped once from his fingers, clanging hard to the dirt. He cursed under his breath and leaned in harder. She held fast, mud running down her arms, dress soaked through. Together, they got it braced. Then they stood in the dark, side by side, soaked, chests heaving. And she laughed. Just once. A small laugh, tired and sharp. "You all right?" he asked, brushing water from his brow. She nodded. "We didn't die." Back in the cabin, they peeled off wet clothes, changed in silence. He gave her a fresh shirt from the bottom of the trunk, his brother's old one. She didn't ask, just pulled it on and sat by the fire while he stirred the coals back to life. The rain roared on, but inside it was warm again. They ate late, just beans heated quick. Neither had the strength for more. After, she sat with her knees pulled close, watching the stove. "You didn't have to come out," she said. "I'm not letting you hold a roof up alone." "You didn't have to take me in either," she said. He turned to look at her. "You weren't a thing I took," he said. "You stayed." She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "I stayed because you didn't treat me like I was nothing." He didn't respond. But when she shifted closer and rested her head lightly against his shoulder, he didn't move away. The fire popped, and outside, the storm began to ease. In the morning, the sky was clear again. The barn still stood. The cabin hadn't leaked. The land was soft, but not ruined. They stepped outside together, and for the first time, they saw it. Not just the cabin, the corral, or the broken fence line they still hadn't finished, but the start of something whole. Not survival. A home. The letter came in a folded envelope without a return mark, tacked to the notice board in town, pinned by some official from Tucson. A neighbor from 5 miles down brought it up the ridge, saying he figured it was important, since it had Harlan's name on it and the seal of the territorial office. Harlan read it at the table, jaw tight. "They're calling her unclaimed property," he muttered. Kyle looked up from the basin, hands still wet from washing the morning dishes. "What does that mean?" "It means they're coming again." 2 days later, 4 men rode up the ridge. This time, they weren't federal agents. They wore town badges, brass stars pinned to dusty vests, but none of them looked like lawmen. They looked like men who were paid to act tough, paid to remind people who mattered and who didn't. The leader, a thick-shouldered man with a tobacco stain on his chin, didn't dismount. Just leaned forward in the saddle, boots hanging loose in the stirrups. "You Harlan Grieve?" "I am." That girl inside still marked on record as unregistered exchange property. That puts her in violation of the Western Sovereign Act, which, "She's not property," Harlan said flatly. And she's not going anywhere. The man smirked. You signed a voucher. It's government issue. Unless you got a document that says otherwise, marriage, labor contract, church bond. She's still in gray area. Kaya stepped outside before Harlan could answer. She wore a clean cotton shirt now, patched but strong. Her hair was tied back tight. No fear on her face, just steadiness. You want me to leave? She asked the men. The leader looked her over. Ain't personal, girl. It's about record. She took a step closer. I've been here for 7 months. I cook. I clean. I work the land. If I'm not legal, then neither are half the wives in Arroyo Ford. The men chuckled behind the lead writer, but it faded quick when Harlan stepped forward. She's under my roof. She's free. And anyone trying to take her is going to have to step inside my home to do it. Silence stretched. One of the younger men on horseback shifted uneasily. We really doing this? The leader grunted. We'll take it to the judge. Do that, Harlan said. But you won't take her today. After a long pause, the lead man spit into the dirt and turned his horse. Next time, you better have papers. Harlan didn't answer, just stood there as the riders moved off down the slope, dust trailing behind. Kaya didn't move until they were gone. Then she turned to him. You really would have stood in front of them? He looked at her. No hesitation. I still will. She nodded slowly, then stepped closer, close enough that the tension in her shoulders finally dropped. That night, she pulled the threadbare blanket from her cot and laid it across the foot of his bed. She didn't ask permission, and he didn't stop her. She slept in his bed that night, separate still, but beside him. No words, no need. And in the dark, when the rain came again, soft on the tin roof, she reached for his hand. This time, he held it back, tighter. The ridge was gold now. Dry grass waved in soft gusts that blew in from the west, carrying the scent of pine and coming frost. The air had cooled, and the morning started with wood smoke curling steady from the chimney. The days shortened, but they didn't mind. They had a rhythm now, one they didn't explain to anyone. Harlan no longer limped as badly. The ache still came on cold nights, but less than before. Kaya made sure of it. She pressed warmth into his leg each evening with a hot stone wrapped in cloth. And every time he winced, she said nothing, just stayed near. She cooked more now, taught herself to make bread from the sack of flour he'd long forgotten he had, cleaned the stovetop till it didn't smell like rust. He replaced the broken window latch she kept wincing at when the wind hit too sharp. No one told them to do these things. They just did, together. One morning, they built a bench. It wasn't fancy, just 2 planks across a pair of stones, placed under the pine tree by the water trough. He cut the wood. She sanded the edges with a scrap of hide. When they were done, they sat there as the sun climbed, each holding a tin cup. You miss anything? She asked quietly, eyes on a ridge. He thought about it. Noise, maybe. Town once in a while. Then he looked at her. You? She nodded once. My sister. My language. But not the people who sold me. He didn't press. She didn't add more. By the second week of September, the corral was finished. Fully enclosed. No gaps. They didn't even have stock yet, but that didn't seem to matter. They sat on the edge of the fence one evening, both of them dirt-smudged and quiet. She turned to him. You're still waiting. For what? For someone to take me away. He didn't lie. I think about it. She nodded slowly. I did too, but not anymore. When she reached up and laid her hand on his cheek, he didn't move. Her fingers were calloused now. Her wrists healed, her back straight. He leaned in slow like something earned. Their first kiss was quiet. Not desperate, not claimed, just certain. Already set the ladder out by the woodpile, she said. He smiled faintly. Course you did. Just before noon, the men came again. 2 this time. Not riders. They came in a wagon, dressed in tailored coats, faces shaved. They weren't lawmen or bounty hunters, just men with papers. The taller one stepped forward, holding out a folded document. Mr. Grieve, you didn't respond to the summons. The matter's gone up to the territorial board. Final visit. Kaya stepped out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her skirt. The man looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, this isn't about harm. It's about process. According to record, you were never legally. She stays, Harlan said. The man blinked. Sir, I don't think you understand what the courts. I understand. He pointed to the land behind them. The corral, the barn, the smokehouse they'd started stacking stone for last week. She stays, he repeated, voice low, final. She's home. The second man didn't even get out of the wagon. The first frost came early. The grass crisped white before sunrise. The water barrel froze half an inch over by morning. The trees lost their leaves all at once, as if the ridge exhaled and let go of everything at the same time. Inside the cabin, it was warm. Kaya was at the stove, barefoot, sleeves rolled, quietly stirring the pot of beans with one hand and holding a mug of coffee in the other. Her braid was loose today, falling down her back. She didn't look tired. She looked like she belonged. Harlan stood near the door, watching the light creep across the floorboards. His leg ached, but it always did when the seasons changed. It was part of him now, like the scar on his shoulder or the quiet in his chest. Things he carried, things he no longer carried alone. Kaya turned and handed him the mug, colds settling in. He nodded, took the cup, let the warmth settle into his palms. We'll need to start the roof patch this week. They left without another word. That night, Kaya mended one of his shirts at the table. He sharpened the same knife he'd used since the war, seated beside her. Outside, wind moved through the trees in long, soft strokes. After dinner, she sat beside him on the bench under the pine. He slid an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into it. No weight, no question, just closeness. He looked at her hand resting in his lap, weathered now, calloused, stained from work. His hand covered it. No vows had been spoken. No rings, no papers, no priest. But when she tilted her head against his shoulder and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere," he answered without looking away from the horizon, "I know." And in the last light of day, the cabin stood strong against the wind. One man, one woman, two cots pushed together. No chains, no prize, just peace. She stayed, and that meant everything.